Good afternoon. So I'm Marina from Synergies. I'm the co-coordinator of the association together with my colleague Simone Matour. And for those who don't know it, Forum Synergies is an association created 25 years ago with the purpose of linking sustainable practices throughout Europe. And we did that, and we usually do that through physical gatherings and workshops, which are unfortunately on hold due to the pandemic. And during these meetings, we try to facilitate space where people are enabled to exchange views in a safe way and share with others. So it means bringing together people from different background, profile, countries, culture. And that's why from its early beginning, Forum Synergy has given importance to constructive dialogue. And it explains a little bit our interest on what we call civic dialogue. So dialogue, we need to build and cooperate to build a common project, to solve conflicts in rural spaces, or to learn how to manage resources together, for example. So that's why we are here today, to follow exploring what are principles and methods of dialogue and how dialogue can contribute to the solution of our current challenges, starting from the local level. Just, I show you that book. You can find it on our website, so you will know a little bit more about what we did in the past years related to that. And now I give, and we'll, just a last sentence. All this is done bringing the voice of the field. That's why we give voice to the local stories, and it's an important element we're also bringing into this webinar. Thank you. Have a nice exchange.
Thank you, Marina. So I'm Davy Philippe. I'm one of the partners in this webinar along with Geyser and Forum Synergies. I work through Cultivate, that's the Sustainable Ireland Cooperative. We've been partnering with Forum Synergies on a number of webinars looking at regional or territorial resilience through food with the last two, and now really focusing on deepening civic dialogue. So we're facilitating this event from our digital studio in Clough-Jordan Eco-Village, where we're based. And we're just delighted to be welcoming so many French speakers and experimenting with the translation. So our objective with this webinar is to hear some framing around some aspects that might help us deepen dialogue. Then we're going to hear 4 stories, very short stories from India, France, Spain, and Ireland on territorial, bioregional, and neighborhood and climate dialogue. So to hear some insights. What we're looking for is patterns there, any insights and reflections that we can build on. We'll then go into a breakout room where we'll be exploring what's coming up. And then we'll come back in and we'll weave together some of the insights, reflections, and patterns we find to see if we can identify ways to deepen civic dialogue at these times. If you're a French speaker and would like to be in a breakout room with other French speakers, please put an F in front of your name. So you go up to your picture, there's a blue box at the top right corner, and you press, there's a drop-down menu with rename. Just put F in front of your name, that'd be great. And just to get a sense of community, I'm going to invite you to just introduce yourselves on the chat as we go through now the framing presentation, which we're going to go into now. So we may, I think for the slides, we will probably have to pin my slide there so you can see them, because I don't think when Chris starts speaking. So hopefully you can do that. Again, it's the 3 buttons at the top of my picture with the slides now. And if you just hit pin, you should see Chrissy's slides as we move through. So just to keep us moving, I'm going to introduce Chris Chapman. I've worked with Chris Chapman for over 15 years. He's an experienced facilitator of systemic dialogue. He's based in Ireland, and he's working both at the local community level, but also with the transformation of complex systems through greater inclusion and participation. So it's my great pleasure for this framing presentation to hand over to Chris Chapman. Over to you, Chris.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. Good to see everyone. Good to see some familiar faces in the audience from Ireland and from some different countries, which is great. And good to meet different people. So as David says, if you want to see the slides, if you've currently got kind of pictures of everybody on your screen, if you click on the picture that has the slide, you can go into the three little dots and press pin, and then the slides will become big, which will be good. So the good news is I think I've only got 4 or 5 slides, so we're not going to go for too long. And this is just a little quick introduction for 10 minutes before we go to hear the stories or the experiences. So we called the session Deepening Civic Dialogue. And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, so deepening is part of the problem. You know, that some of the conversations we have are just like on the surface, and we're not really getting deep enough to the depth and the complexity of the issues that we're trying to deal with. But also, we could have called it in some ways widening or broadening civic dialogue. So another part of the problem is, or for me, is really often that we just don't get enough variety in the people involved in our dialogue process. So you'll see the slide that's just come up there. This was from an event I was involved in a year or 2 ago, where we had about 20 people came together who were involved in climate action and climate dialogue in Ireland. And in some ways, it was a really sad event, because what happened was it just became really obvious in that event that lots that people were trying to do, we were making the same mistakes again and again and again. You know, that we weren't, so we could talk about where we thought the leading edge was, where we thought really good practice was, but actually a lot of the time we were making really simple mistakes. So people were making really simple mistakes. So these were the 7 kind of simple mistakes people kept on making it again and again. So the first one that we highlighted there was that when we're talking about civic dialogue, we're talking about trying to engage communities. People are at different stages. So, you know, often we were coming across dialogues where it was set up as if, you know, everyone knew the same information. So if you were a beginner, you were lost if they were assuming kind of expert information. If you were a bit of an expert in something, you were lost if they treated you like a beginner. And a lot of processes just didn't have the flexibility to kind of acknowledge that different people were at different stages. So that was the second thing, really. You have to engage people where they're at. You have to start where they're at. So lots of examples of projects and initiatives which try and start somewhere where people aren't, and then criticize them for not being where you are or where you want them to be. One of the other things we noticed that went wrong quite a lot was about the link between awareness and action. So some projects seem to spend a long time on awareness and talk and talk and talk and talk, and then people get very frustrated that there isn't a link to action. They don't know what they can do with this knowledge. Or some projects jump into action. They're very kind of activist oriented, and people haven't got the foundation. So the way in which we link awareness and action is really important. And the suggestion is we have to actually form the link really quite quickly. Obviously, so I know these are all really easy lessons, but it's just kind of when we started looking around, people were getting these things wrong again and again. The message matters, the language we use matters. So lots of examples of people using language which is really not helpful. Examples of people working with existing community leaders and not with anybody else, or examples of people working, you know, pushing to work with, you know, activists and all different types of people in the community and ignoring the people who have been doing the work for years and years. Whereas really, if the dialogue needs to be effective, it needs to be working with everybody. And yeah, two more on this. Certainly the experience seems to be things really change when younger people get involved. So lots of examples of dialogue projects that haven't involved younger people and can be very familiar, and people just talking to themselves. There's a different energy. If you get the involvement right, different things happen when younger people come in. And then also coming from the state or the system, Lots of examples where the fact that communities actually need some level of support and capacity building and resources are completely ignored. So anyway, so these are kind of 7 lessons that just seem to get, well, yeah, things we seem to keep not learning in lots of places. So if we can move on there, Davey. So the 3 things that I'm really going to draw most attention to today are the 3 on your slide now. So the forming the field, the who we include, how we include piece, the interior condition of the host, so how we we called it seeding the field, and then the methods and processes we used, and then being fit for purpose. We called that nurturing for growth. So I'll just go through that very quickly. So the who we include, clearly if we're talking civic dialogue, the logic is it really should be everybody. And then if we look at our initiatives, we're really not including everybody, and so we've got a problem. So I'm really interested to hear, as we go through the stories and listen to the stories, you know, the efforts that have been made to include different people. But really, if we're in the business of including everybody, then the question is, I suppose, what does it take for them to be included, for them to be enabled to be included in a particular initiative? And the only way to find that out is to actually go out and ask them. So that actually starts to become a lot of work. But you know, that's the truth of it. To do this work properly does actually take a lot of work to get out and have contact with all the different groups you want to involve. So I might come back with some more examples later, and I'm sure we're going to hear some examples from the stories. The interior condition of the host, slightly strange language. This is language that gets used a lot in, there's a global community of practice that I'm part of. There's probably a few people on here that are part of it, called the art of hosting. The art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matter. It also gets referred to a lot in the Theory U community. So the interior condition of the host is really for the people who are hosting or facilitating dialogue, what's going on inside the host will have a really big impact on what happens in the event or in the initiative. So if I'm full of anxiety and I start talking really quickly, it's not just bad for the person doing the interpreting, but it's probably bad for everybody. Or if I think I've got all the answers and everyone else is just slow learners and I'm waiting for them to catch up, then that attitude will come across. So what's going on for me inside is going to have a lot of bearing on what actually happens, how powerful the dialogue process is. And yeah, so more experienced hosts, certainly the people I like working most, tend to be people who in one form or another practice mindfulness or yoga or play music or do something that helps them manage and have good habits in their interior condition. So that's an important piece. Who we include, how we are inside. And then what I want to say very briefly on methods and processes was, one of the dangers when you start talking about dialogue is people tend to say my method is best. Whichever method they use, they say this is the best one, this is the one that everyone should use. And really, it's like a carpenter or someone choosing their tools. Different tools are better for different jobs. So hopefully we'll see, as we hear the stories, people are using different tools and processes, and we'll start to get a feel, and maybe I'll come back a bit at the end and talk a little bit about some of the patterns and about why we use particular methods, particular processes for different jobs. We can just move on there. David, move the slide on, please. Thank you. So just a couple more slides, just to finish on the tools and processes piece. So this will be very familiar for a lot of people, this kind of notion of an iceberg model. I don't know if you're able to see the detail, but above the waterline, it just says events, what's happening. So it's really easy to have conversations about what's happening, what's going on, what's it like for different people, which is a kind of surface conversation. But actually, to get the change that we want to get, we very often need to be going deeper. So in this version of the model, which was originally, this version is originally from Donella Meadows, very famous in system thinking. As we go down, we've got patterns of behavior, system structure, mental models. And we really need to have clarity as we get into process. What is it we're actually trying to address? Are we just trying to play around on the surface, or are we trying to go deep, and if so, how deep? And different models are better at going deep. Some are better at going deep than others. But just as it says on the left there's two tensions that we really feel. So we know to do the work we really want to do that we need to go deep a lot of the time, or quite deep. Sorry if I can just stay there, thank you. We know we want to go quite deep, but there's these two tensions. So there's the one tension that if we're trying to include everybody, the more we try and include people, the more we try and go broad, it's hard to go deep at the same time. So that'll be an interesting thing to listen to as we're listening to the stories, how we can do broad and deep at the same time. And then the second thing is, if we want to go deep, but we also want to include action really quickly, how do we get the action that reflects the depth? How do we get that balance right? So again, we'll try and unpick that a little bit as we go on. And thank you, Dave. If we just go to the same slide. I just wanted to say as well, in terms of the methods and the processes, again, this will be familiar to lots of people. I would have a real positivity and a bias towards positive processes. So appreciative inquiry is very famous. Asset-based community development is very famous as well. But processes that include some element of the positive. Where are the seeds that we can grow good things from? It's really easy, particularly if we're working with climate issues, to be enormously negative and enormously depressing and feel that we have to give people loads and loads of bad news. And so these appreciative or positive-based, asset-based processes are really useful to have as starting points. And again, we might come back a little bit to that later on, just as when we've heard the stories, to reflect on what we're hearing and how they pick up some of these points about balancing breadth and depth and building on the positive. So great to see some of the things people are putting in the chat. Obviously, loads of knowledge and experience in the group. Really looking forward to hearing some of the feedback as we go through the session. And thank you, David.
Okay, so thanks, Chris. That's our framing. We have 4 stories. We're going to hear 2 and we're going to take a pause, see if we can gather any insights, reflections, or patterns, and then hear the next 2. So we're going to start off. It's my great pleasure to introduce Swarnalakshmi Ravi, who is the convener of the Global Youth Council and the former National Child Prime Minister of India. Swarnalakshmi is an advisor to the Erasmus project Sonic, which is developing neighborhood dialogue processes based on the neighborhood parliaments from India and influenced by sociocracy. So I think this is quite an interesting departure for us. So Swarnalakshmi, if you would like to give us your 5 minutes of insights from your experience with the neighborhood parliaments. Again, if you pin the slides, you'll see that. Swarnalakshmi, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. So thank you very much for your warm introduction, and greetings everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you all to share on how dialogue that's made a difference in inclusive neighborhood parliaments that I work with. So the inclusive neighborhood parliaments include everyone in a neighborhood, where one representative from each household comes together on a common platform
Speech mode off.
To discuss social issues that they see around them and their peers, divide them based on SDGs, and undertake projects to find concrete solutions, and learn together as and when they go on. The learning process, the projects that they undertake, and the social issues they discuss are all facilitated by the governance structure of sociocracy. These are federated, where 30 households would send a representative each to a neighborhood. And when 30 of such units are formed, they send a representative each to an area level parliament. 30 of such area parliaments then would send a representative to a district level one, and it goes up to the national and global level, although the global one is currently evolving. There are 3 different kinds of these units. They are the units formed with children, the units formed with youth, and the units formed with adults. Although there is a lot more to say about these inclusive neighborhood parliaments, I feel that right now it is important for me to focus on how do we ensure meaningful participation and that marginal voices are heard. The moment I was thinking about this question, I thought, that it would be really great to share my own story. I studied in a school for persons with visual disabilities, and I studied there along with my peers. My peers and I thought that we were not given an opportunity to talk with each other until we got introduced to the neighborhood children's parliament that was introduced in our school. When they introduced it, they asked us, the first thing that they asked us was to sit in a circle. The moment we sat in a circle, we were really relieved because there were nobody in front of us and nobody at the back, and that we were not given a microphone. It was pretty much small in size, that we were able to interact with everyone. And that initiated the dialogue among all of us. That helped me to become a communication minister. And as a communication minister, my job was to read newspapers and every day communicate them to my peers. I did it, and my peers saw my dedication in that and elected me up above to the state level. I represented my school to the state, and I was there, but I did not know anybody. It was pretty strange to me, except I knew the person who invited me. There were a lot more people, but out of them, 30 of us were elected, and we were asked to sit in a circle again. Each of us were given an opportunity to talk, and therefore the opportunity came to me too. I raised and spoke, but there was a person, despite that people were able to hear me, thought that he needs to translate me as I'm a person with visual disability, and he did it. That made me to think that I need to speak up for myself. So I just said that, excuse me, I really wanted to speak because everybody is able to hear me, and my peers, when they talk, I'm able to hear. So it would be great if I speak for myself, and he heard me. I was able to say this because I was given an opportunity in a circle. Had it been in rows, had it been in lines, I don't think that I would have spoken because of different things. Maybe I'm sitting back, or maybe just because if I'm given an opportunity to sit in the middle, then I would think that, oh, somebody is sitting in front of me, that I can't speak up, or I don't need to speak up. But sitting in a circle helped me. And also, when I was given an opportunity without leaving behind, helped me to dialogue with them and make them understand. That helped me get elected as a finance minister. My peers heard me. They enjoyed my leadership. I exercised my leadership along with responsibility and power, which helped me to become the prime minister of the state and then the prime minister of the national level, and right now here as a convener of the global level. And I represented India in United Nations 4 times too. At that time, when I represented India in United Nations, it was not just few children, but for the entire country, the entire nation. I was able to do this because my peers heard me. They heard me what I said, what I was able to present. So what I feel is that could ensure dialogue is the process we follow, that is sociocracy, where we initiate dialogue by giving an opportunity to everyone without leaving anybody behind. And belongingness, when we all are together, we felt the belongingness. And then considering someone's problem as our own problem, it's not just their problem, it is also ours. And that helped us to dialogue more and to mutually aid. And we were able to bring the results. So with this, I think that I could conclude. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk on this dialogue.
Swarnalakshmi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights from your neighbourhood parliaments and feeding into what we're doing with neighborhood dialogue. So thanks for that. Hopefully, if we capture some insights, put them in the chat. Our next story is from France. It's by Philippe Barret. He's from Geyser, which is a partner in this webinar. So Philippe has been working with us to develop this. Philippe is an agronomist. Sorry, Philippe is an agronomist. Sorry, I struggle with that word. And an environmental mediator. He'll give us some insights into territorial dialogue and how mediation and conflict resolution was used to preserve biodiversity of mountain pastures in the French Alps. So over to you, Philippe. And again, pin the slides to see. And Philippe, you're very welcome.
Bonjour à tous et merci beaucoup d'être présents si nombreux à cette soirée. Je vais vous présenter une expérience parmi beaucoup d'autres, mais j'ai choisi celle-là d'abord parce qu'on est dans un très beau paysage dans les Alpes françaises, non loin de la Suisse et de l'Italie. Et l'expérience que je vais vous relater, c'est une expérience où j'ai eu la chance d'être médiateur, consiste vraiment à renverser une situation, c'est-à-dire à partir d'une situation bloquée autour d'un conflit qu'on pourrait qualifier de conflit environnemental, pour transformer ce conflit en un projet de territoire. En 4 diapos, je vais vous présenter donc rapidement cette expérience. D'abord, la situation avant le dialogue. On est donc dans une petite zone de montagne pas loin du Mont Blanc, donc du point culminant des Alpes, avec un des meilleurs pâturages de la région qui, dans les années 1960, est noyé par la construction, en partie en tout cas, par la construction d'un grand barrage hydroélectrique. Et la construction de ce barrage laisse beaucoup de blessures, notamment dans le monde agricole. Et 50 ans, voire 50 ans, 60 ans après presque, les relations entre les acteurs de ce petit territoire restent compliquées, notamment entre le monde agricole et la compagnie d'électricité qui gère ce barrage. Un demi-siècle après la construction du barrage, un certain nombre d'acteurs, dont notamment la commune et puis la compagnie électrique, souhaitent mettre en place un projet de protection de la flore de ces alpages. Et ce projet déclenche une très forte opposition du monde agricole, qui évidemment est très liée aux blessures laissées par la construction du barrage 50 ans avant. Donc, vous voyez comme des fois des erreurs, je dirais, ou des mauvaises relations peuvent perdurer dans le temps. Je veux bien la diapo suivante. Merci pour la passe. Voilà. Cette situation de blocage, comment la surmonter? Alors, les acteurs du terrain, en tout cas la commune qui est concernée, la collectivité territoriale, fait appel souhaite faire appel à un médiateur, un tiers neutre, pour débloquer cette situation. Très vite, il est proposé de constituer un groupe de coordination, un comité de coordination qui va accompagner le processus de dialogue et dans lequel vont être représentés les principaux groupes d'intérêt du territoire. Donc, on va y retrouver les associations de protection de la nature, on va y retrouver le monde agricole, on va y retrouver les collectivités territoriales, la commune, et on va y retrouver bien sûr la compagnie d'électricité. Donc, ce groupe va jouer un rôle très important pour accompagner le médiateur dans la mise en place d'un espace de dialogue qui puisse se créer de la confiance. Le deuxième élément de cette préparation, c'est la réalisation de une vingtaine d'entretiens bilatéraux. Donc, c'est le médiateur qui va rencontrer les principales personnes concernées par ce site, par ce territoire. À l'issue de ces entretiens, une synthèse des entretiens est réalisée et envoyée à tous ceux qui ont été rencontrés pour qu'ils puissent prendre connaissance que tout le monde ait la même information sur la situation, sur les attentes, sur les besoins, sur les craintes des acteurs du territoire. Et dernier élément de cette préparation, l'objectif initial, qui est un objectif de protection de la nature, devient un objectif un projet de territoire qui permet très vite donc de montrer que la préoccupation des différents acteurs est bien prise en compte et pas seulement la préoccupation de la protection de la nature. J'insiste sur ce côté-là parce que trop souvent, les projets de préservation de la biodiversité sont des projets, je dirais, qui ne mobilisent finalement, qui n'intéressent qu'une certaine partie des acteurs du territoire. Et là, si on élargit, on crée le lien entre la protection de la biodiversité et les activités humaines. Alors, le cœur du dialogue, donc, une fois que cette phase de préparation est terminée, on a mis en place donc 3 instances. Alors, l'instance de coordination, le groupe de concertation où se retrouvent tous les acteurs, qui va construire le diagnostic et un plan d'action, et ensuite un groupe de pilotage qui prépare la décision, qui est donc où sont présents les principaux décideurs de la commune, de l'État et de la compagnie électrique. Bien sûr, dans le dialogue demande le fait de constituer, de clarifier un cadre, de poser un cadre clair et validé par tous. Et le cœur du dialogue, porte sur vraiment la compréhension mutuelle des besoins de chacun et un tour sur le terrain qui permet de visualiser et de partager donc les perceptions, les visions et les besoins de chacun. Je veux bien le schéma, la diapo suivante, s'il vous plaît. La diapo suivante, oui. Voilà, donc ce travail donc, que je viens d'exposer extrêmement rapidement permet de mettre en évidence 3 axes de travail. Un axe qui est plutôt le développement des activités sur ce site, sur cette petite région, ce petit territoire. Un axe qui touche à la préservation du patrimoine, que ce soit le patrimoine biologique, donc la biodiversité, ou que ce soit le patrimoine culturel. Et enfin, un 3e axe qui est l'accueil des visiteurs qui sont nombreux sur ce territoire. Ces axes se déclinent en 21 fiches actions. Alors ça, c'est le produit vraiment du dialogue. On note une évolution très claire du lien entre les acteurs. Et aujourd'hui, le dialogue se poursuit de manière très nourrie avec des valeurs qui ont été partagées pendant cette phase de construction, la bienveillance, le respect, le dialogue et la coopération. Voilà donc très rapidement, je crois qu'en 5 minutes, ce qui est un vrai défi, cette expérience de dialogue territorial. Merci à tous.
Thank you, Philippe. We'll go straight into thinking about reflections. We'll take a pause, really, to help the facilitator or the translator just take a few breaths. So I'd like you to maybe just share anything that's coming up in the chat. Chris, while we're here, are you seeing any patterns while we're taking this little pause?
Sorry, let's turn my camera on. Thank you, Davey. Yes, so we're having a pause for the interpreter, and I'm going to try and speak a little bit in French as well. So, il est bon de donner une petite pause à notre interprète. You'll see the question in the chat. We're asking what interests you most. So, qu'est-ce qui vous intéresse le plus dans la discussion là? For me, I'm really struck with about inclusion and the children, les enfants, pour commencer. Et si on commence avec les enfants, tout marche. Mais, yeah, it's interesting to hear from you. So, do you want to type in the chat your thoughts?
Okay, so if everyone can share any insights, reflections, patterns that we can identify, we're going to discuss them in smaller rooms after the next 2 stories. and then we'll weave together to see if we can share insights before we close. So our next story is from Spain. It's a story of bioregional dialogue. It's an example of community activation and co-design to strengthen the resilience of a socio-ecosystem in 2 biosphere reserves in Spain. And it uses a participatory process to identify local responses to the challenges posed by climate change and generates initiatives in the bioregion. So handing over to Jorge Sánchez Cruzado. Thanks for joining us. Over to you, Jorge.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to the conversation. So yeah, I'm going to present this process that we've been working on since 2019 in 2 biosphere reserves in northern Spain. One is near the northern coast, Omaña y Luna, in the province of León, and the other is in the Pyrenees, is Ordes-Viñamala. So those regions they have a very little population, no? Like there are very small towns, very dispersed, dispersed in the territory, and almost no young people living there. And there is a lack of cohesion in these communities. Like everyone is involved in their own daily activities, and there's not so many like community activities or community cohesion. So yeah, when we arrived there in the beginning, it was like very hard to bring people into the conversation. And actually, people were a little bit tired of participating in different participatory processes that they were saying from zero, like, oh, we did many things like this and nothing happened, you know, like we have, again, the same troubles. And this is very hard to change the situation and to really bring new things to the place. So it was really hard in the beginning. But then, what we did, and actually Chris mentioned in his presentation, we tried to deepen the conversation. And so we tried to turn upside down the approach, how we came to the people and how we started the conversation. So the idea was to go beyond personal interests and related to their daily activities, and thinking more on like a deeper level, like going deeper on human needs. And so we started the process like framing a common vision, like let's try to speak the same language, because everyone came to these processes like bringing their troubles, their issues, like there's a lack of social services, like my economic activity is not going very well, and the European Union is not giving like a funding for my activity or whatever. So that's how they came to these processes usually. So what we said is like, don't think on that. Don't focus on the problems. Don't focus on your on your daily issues. Just think on how good you imagine this land in the future. So we try to frame a common vision, like framing this, from a deeper level, from human needs, like saying like, well, we divided this, we use this dynamic that is in the slide on the right side, that is called like the ice cream model. So first we frame in ecological aspects, social aspects, and economic activities, but thinking on the future, not on your activity. Like, how would you like this region to be in 50 years, let's say, something like that. So at the end, you see that mostly everyone had the same vision. There's like, okay, we want decent jobs, we want children in the towns, we want active schools, we want clean rivers and healthy forests. So like, it was quite easy to create a common vision for the future. And then from there, we saw that we could speak the same language. And so the collaboration started from there. So it's not like bringing their conflicts. Oh, can you go to the previous, sorry? Because there's something I want to mention. So after framing this vision, I'm actually running out of time. what we really did is applying a perceptive inquiry. So it's like, what are we doing as, right now? What are the potentials that we can use to bring us to this vision? And so there was like a really a lot of things that were already taken to that common vision. And then we started like framing a little bit what are the challenges and what are the levers that can actually help us bring it to this vision. This methodology was inspired by this Wayfinder methodology that is being developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center. And yeah, if you go to the next slides, please, there's some pictures of the workshops. So what we really wanted was to create community relationships, not facing big challenges, but really start connecting people and doing actions from zero, really like bottom up, and actions that were feasible by the community. So if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, those are from the workshops. And at the end, as a result, and yeah, in the next slide, we created 2 action plans for both biosphere reserves, and they are now yeah, being applied. So yeah, here the focus was on creating community resilience, like strengthening relationships amongst the community to really start talking and envisioning a common future. So yeah, thank you very much. There's this website on Resiliencia Montana that you can check if you wanna know more about this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. That was fascinating. It's good to hear appreciative inquiry. I think Chris mentioned that in the framing, different approaches to really build on what people are positive about or appreciate in their place. We're going to keep moving. The next story is from Ireland. It's a climate dialogue story from Aine O'Gorman. Aine is the mobilization coordinator with Stop Climate Chaos, which is our big coalition of civil society organizations in Ireland. And Aine will share some learnings from the One Future campaign, where a network of local groups were formed with a specific aim of connecting people with their elected politicians, their elected representatives, and maintaining a dialogue with them. So Aine, over to you. You're muted, Aine.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hi from Dublin. It's lovely to be here with you all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the One Future campaign, and what I've just noticed from everyone else's slides is that there's lots of lovely pictures of, you know, in-person events and sticky notes and all this kind of thing. And this campaign, for the most part, was actually conceptualized during 2020, and so it's almost entirely, well, actually has entirely been online. So unfortunately, you're not going to see any pictures of sticky notes. And the idea was we were looking at climate action in Ireland, and it's a bit different to some of the other stories because we were talking about getting people in contact with their local politicians, or politicians that represent them at a national level. But in Ireland, we have a system where you will elect between 3 and 5 politicians in your county or your local area, and then they go on to represent you in the parliament. And our politicians in Ireland are quite responsive for that reason, they're quite responsive to local pressure. So a lot of our campaigning would be done around that. But what we saw was, you know, we like within NGOs, we've been working for like many years with politicians, and often, you know, you'd use tactics such as can everyone email their TD on this issue. But we really felt that there was a disconnect between people knowing that they could be in touch with their politicians, knowing that they could push for climate action in their local areas and together, and also the feeling that politicians were consistently saying that this was not an issue during elections, and it's not an issue for their voters. So that was kind of where we were coming at it from. And there was also a piece about giving people support and opportunity to meet other people within their constituencies, which are quite big areas, they're kind of county size, to talk to other people in their areas who care about climate action. So it's not as place-based, as maybe the previous stories, but it is still looking at how can we affect national level policy change in the political electoral politics spectrum. through local-based groups. So we built online, and we just asked people, hey, do you want to do this thing? Would you like to join people in your local area to come together for one day in December 2020 to talk to your TD about climate action? So that was our first thing to ask. Yes, thank you, Susie. Yeah, TD is the member of Parliament. And the idea was to have one big day as an initial ask for people to really catalyze people to come together. But then our long-term strategy is to work with people across the country to give them support to be cultivating their own groups, their own communities, and be cultivating their relationship with their members of Parliament, because they know what's happening on the ground more than anyone else. And we know that in Ireland, having people in connection with their local politicians can actually help to shift policy change. So that's kind of the basis. One of the questions that I was asked to address was the question of diversity. We don't have very diverse from like an ethnic perspective or a race perspective or a class perspective. I think that is the fact that this is the base that we have worked off. We sent emails to our usual member supporters. That's not to say that there isn't some diversity there, but overall there isn't a huge diversity. What we have found is we have an interesting rural, because we focused less on like individuals taking national level action and focused on meet people in your community. We have actually realized quite a broad spread across rural and urban, which wouldn't be usual. And we have quite a lot of farmers, and especially in traditional dairy farmers, which is very strange in Ireland, to have traditional dairy farmers engaging within climate action. That's really powering up our group. I will just go back for 1 second. There's one more thing I wanted to say, because our slogan is faster and fairer climate action. And the idea behind that is that we want politicians and anyone who's creating policy or taking climate action to do action that has urgency around it, but also action that has social benefits and doesn't have detrimental effects on poorer people, less well-off people, people from marginalized backgrounds. And so that's what we're calling for, and that's the kind of baseline that we're coming from. But it's currently not. We're currently not necessarily hearing the voices of those people. So that's a separate and another piece of work that we're starting to do. But that's where we're at. It's good to be honest about these things, I think. So what worked for us so far? This is only it's only been really going since October. So it's baby. But what's worked for us so far to get a lot of people engaged is a big ask. So we said, will you sign up to meet your politicians, get other people in your area to meet them with you, ask them some questions, and mobilize people within your own area to meet your national representative. So a big ask around a big moment. We found that I hate WhatsApp groups, but we found that WhatsApp groups are a really effective way to get a lot of people engaged and get together very quickly and talking to each other. And we found that giving a lot of support. So people, and I think this is something that Chris mentioned on his very first slide, was the fact that often we don't resource these efforts enough, and we assume that people have enough knowledge, or people need a lot of support to do these things, all the way from, can I actually talk to my TD? Can I actually talk to my member of parliament? So there's a lot of just support needed, and I think that's very fair, and it's a responsibility of anyone engaging in these processes to give people support. And then the final slide is what would it take? So what can we do, I suppose? What are we working on going forwards to have better dialogue? Because what we really want is we want a process where there are multiple voices working together to influence a common platform. And then there are groups around the country engaging with their local politicians on a common platform that has a multitude of voices that have fed in from multiple backgrounds. So what we really need is a lot of long-term planning and really like digging. And I think that's the interesting, I was really thinking about that from what Chris was saying about like, how do we go deep and how do we go wide at the same time? And I think we kind of went wide very quickly, but now we need to go deep. We're working on a strategic tool to gather warm data. So to say like, well, asking people, what did your TD say when you had a conversation with them, feeding that back into a centralized database, and then identifying where are the mechanisms that we can push and pull and affect actual policy change. So what are the politicians that we can flip? What are the messages that are working across the country that different people and then the different groups can use? And the same with, how are your conversations going with other people in your community? How is that working? And using that kind of data to feed across the country to different groups across the country, so that we can just continuously build on each other's experiences and create change like that. As I said, people need lots of support, advice, practice, training, lots of those things to feel confident. And I think confidence is one of the biggest things that I have noticed, is that just confidence that yes, my voice is valid. My voice is valid in either talking to other people in my community or in talking to politicians. Community involvement. So we're trying to work towards a space where these groups aren't just looking at national level policy change, but they're looking at it in the context of their communities. And then training around welcoming inclusive spaces. So I am assuming that some of the reason that we don't have a huge diversity is possibly because we haven't done training around those kind of spaces with all the groups. That's more than likely one part of it. And so it's important that we do that. Brilliant. And that is a whistle-stop tour of my last 3 months of my life.
Anya, thanks so much. Thanks to all the speakers. Anya, there's some great insights there, especially in the work that we need to do around diversity. And I think this is becoming an issue for all our networks, our movements, and our organizations. Is this? We need a just transition, or we have no transition. So thanks for that, Anya, Jorge, Philippe, and Swarnalakshmi. So we are going to move quite fast. So we have a couple of questions, or one question for the breakout. So there's in the chat, and I'll just bring you back to the slides. So the question we really just want to ask in the breakout room, you'll be in a room of about 5 people. There's a room of French speakers for the people who put F in front of their name. The interpreter will be taking a break. So this allows us to speak freely in French or in English. So the question really is very simple. What did you learn from these stories? And we're going to come back in 15 minutes. We're a little bit over time, but we'll still try and finish on time. We will finish on time. So I'm just going to put you into the breakout rooms. If anyone has any problems, just leave your room and come back. Make sure every voice is heard. If you're a room in 5, you should be listening 4 times as much as you're speaking. So just to bear that in mind. So I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms. Hopefully it all works, and we'll see you back here in the main space in 15 minutes. What did you learn from these stories? We'll see you all back here. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully your conversations were productive. Hopefully they're short. Short, obviously short. It's only an hour-and-a-half webinar. The stories were short. The framing was short. Everything's short. We are going to offer, after we close in the past, we're going to offer if you want to stay around and have chats. But anyway, let's move on. I think, are we all back? People.
They are, Davey. People are back.
Great. Thanks, Susie. Okay, so over to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Davey, and welcome back, everybody. So there's lots of good stories in the world. Obviously, different stories address different things and different types of problems and so on. If you have any particular websites or stories or things that you would like to draw to other people's attention, then put those in the chat, and we can make sure that those are circulated afterwards as well. So obviously we've only heard 4 stories from different countries. There's lots more we could have heard. But yeah, if you put things in the chat, we can start to build up the kind of library of resources. So I see Justina just asking there about will the presentations be available. So I think Marina will talk about that at the end, but I think there will be, yes, the presentations will be available, and Marina will explain how that works. So obviously we're keen to hear from different people about what you were talking about in the rooms. So just because there's still more than 40 of us on the call, as an easy way to do that, we're going to use a bit of software called Mendimeter, or yeah. So if I can invite you to go to the website, hopefully it's on your screen now, menti.com. So you can either do this on a phone, or you can open another window, another tab on your computer. So menti.com, MENTI.com, and you'll be asked for an event code. So the event code today is 581909, 581909. And we're only going to have one question we're going to work with, but it's just it's kind of a just a nice way to kind of show the responses that we're getting in. It means we can see the responses a bit better than if we just use the chat in the Zoom. So what is most interesting now, or qu'est-ce qui est le plus intéressant maintenant? Stumbling on my French. So just what's coming up for you, having had the conversation with 4 or 5 people in a room. What's coming up as most interesting? You know, the things maybe you'd like to know more about, or yeah, the things that have got you thinking. So just interesting to hear from different people. So the first couple are in. Thank you very much. So just to repeat.
How do I get into it?
Yeah, so menti.com. You need to go either on your phone or open another window on your computer. Menti.com, MENTI.com, and then you'll be asked for a meeting code, and the meeting code today is 581909, 581909. So we've got the first few in. It's good feedback for us to hear kind of the different things that people are finding interesting. So the need for diversity, dialogue, the link between the dialogue and the action, the inclusion, neighbourhood parliaments, appreciative inquiry, dialogue working in different regions, Ireland getting the farmers involved. But it's really interesting, the story of the farmers. So for years in Ireland, kind of the people involved in environment work and farmers almost saw each other as enemies. And it's definitely happening in the last year or so. People are realising that they need to be on the same side of the argument, and that we need to be talking together about how we do this. So it's interesting to meet people from all around Europe. So as somebody said, the breakout groups were very, very short, but maybe if we can do other events, we might get a bit more time for meeting. And as Davey mentioned, there'll be a little bit of time for afterwards. The importance of deep listening, absolutely. A lot of the events I do, I begin with a question, something like, what do you want other people to understand about your experience? So obviously it depends on the context that you're working with, but something like, what do you want other people to understand about your experience? And then everybody can say something. So a child can talk about, this is what it's like being a child in this town when you say this and everyone ignores me. Or a refugee can talk about, this is what it's like for me coming new to this place, this region, whatever. Or the farmer can talk to the environmentalist. That's a really kind of warm, friendly place to start. So I noticed that Anya in the last of the stories talked about warm data. I don't know whether she was using it in a kind of technical way, but warmth, I think, is a really important concept in these conversations. So if we just talk about cold data and facts and figures and carbon and parts per million, for most people, it's very, very boring. If we talk about life and home and being together and belonging, it's warmer and people are more interested. And that often means, so the term warm data, some people will be familiar with, particularly I think comes from the work of somebody called Nora Bateson. Somebody might just put that in the chat, maybe Nora Bateson. So Nora Bateson work, she talks about warm data being the kind of the data that connects us across the fields, across the different fields we work in. So cold data is the facts and figures and tends to be in silos and specialities, whereas warm data is actually about the things that link us. So when the farmer talks about how difficult it is to earn a living and all the struggles they have with the weather and the floods and whatever, and then we talk, and we as a person who lives in the town maybe says, I never knew it was like that. Tell me more about this, or actually I have this problem, I don't know if you can help me. That starts to be a warm conversation rather than a lot of the conversations we have, which can be quite cold. So carry on typing things in to the Mentimeter, so menti.com 581909, and Marina and Davey and Philippe and myself and those of us that are thinking about possible future events we'll look at this and see how we can build on this and maybe what the potential is for future webinars and future projects that do a little bit more about this.
Will we have access to all these ideas?
Yes. So one of the really, thank you, Michael. One of the really nice things with this Mentimeter software that we're just using here is that at the end of the session, we can literally just press a button and we get a kind of a PDF printout of the different inputs that people have been making. So
which you'll send to us, will you?
Which we'll send out, and Marina will talk about that in just a few minutes about how we do that sending out. The need to go deeper piece that somebody has mentioned there. I mean, I mentioned that in the start as well. I think one or two people mentioned in the chat the use of a methodology called Theory U from Otto Scharmer in America, which is particularly good for that deeper work and for the work with the iceberg. It's really important in that we don't do the need to go deeper like we understand and they don't. We're always part of the problem. Any of us that facilitate and host, we always have blind spots. We always have things that we don't know and that are difficult for us and that we don't really understand maybe the perspective of some of the other people, or there's always things that we're missing. So I think it's really important that we have a kind of a humility and a curiosity as we go into the work, and that we go deeper together. So it's questions, just to talk a little bit about it, questions like, what will it take to make this work for you? Or what might I be missing? Showing that we don't think we're the expert who knows everything. These questions can really get us through to a breakthrough point. And as we get more diversity and we hear lots and lots of different perspectives and we start to do the deeper work, it has the potential to become overwhelming just because it's incredibly complicated and there's loads and loads of perspectives, loads of pieces. And so it's really important at that point where it becomes overwhelming that we can kind of go still. So that's something they highlight in the Theory U work, that when it starts to become overwhelming, that we have some stillness, that we're not kind of rushing into ill-informed action, but we actually take the time to really feel what the problem is. So really appreciate the nearly 50 comments we've got in now on the Mentimeter. Someone talking about how the youth circles interact with the adult circles. So I don't know in the specific Neighbourhood Parliament example, but just maybe to talk about that from some of the work I've been involved in. It's really important sometimes to separate the circles out initially and then help them come back together to talk to each other. So if we just put everybody together, all in the same circles to begin with, then somebody mentioned in the chat that the power issues just immediately get in the way, and we play out the same patterns we always play out. So if we separate the circles and allow some people to have their own circles where they develop their own thinking, they have their own conversations, hopefully individuals start to feel less isolated. And we use questions like the what do you want other people to understand about your experience questions. That really helps us break through. I'm going to stop sharing there just because we're coming towards the end of the session. But yeah, really appreciate it. Lots of gratitude. Thank you for all the people that have been putting in the thoughts there. As I was saying, if anybody's got particular websites that you want to publicize or point people towards, then put those into the Zoom chat, and that will be really good. Is there anything you want to come back on, Davey, before we pass to Marina? I'm just keeping an eye on the time. You're muted, Davey. Imagine that. That never happened in a Zoom call before.
No, sorry about that. Thanks, Chris, for weaving that together. I really want to thank all our storytellers, Swarnalakshmi from India, Philippe from France, Jorge from Spain, and Omaña from Ireland. But really, thank you for joining this session, for sharing your insights. We are going to share the chat. We're going to save the chat, and we're going to write up some sort of report that Marina will send everyone out. So just thank you, everyone, and I'll pass to Marina to close on time, but we are going to stay open after we close formally. We just wanted to close formally, and then we'll stay open for a bit for a cup of coffee together. So over to you, Marina, for the closing remarks.
Well, more than a closing remark, I would say that as Chris mentioned at the beginning, more than deepening, we have been probably widening the scope of civic dialogue, especially with what came out the Mendimeter. It seems that there is a lot of interest in the road to discuss on that, and just to talk about what could come next, what could be the next steps. This was the first webinar on civic dialogue, and we had in mind to probably follow with one or two other ones. The topic has still to be defined. We're thinking about maybe entering in one specific topic, for instance, how to include better people, about ensure better inclusion and diversity, but it's still open. So also all the inputs you have been giving in the Mendimeter is here to feed our thought. You are also welcome in case you want, to participate, to be part of it, or to give your feedback about maybe a story you would like to share or the way you would like to participate. We are open to that. So thank you for that. And about this session, it has been recorded. We will upload it on our website. We will also upload and share with you all the documents that have been shown. So you will have access to them within a few days. And it's what I said. It's part all our work to follow working, discussing, and deepening into civic dialogue. So please come back to us. Thank you, and stay to the coffee and the exchange now to talk in a more informal way.